When I was first starting out teaching, I worked for an absolutely amazing and excellent and highly professional school district in Arizona. And one of the things that we needed to do at the very beginning of the school year was to look through this catalog that was provided to all teachers and select the professional development courses or experiences that we were going to sign up for that would happen sometime throughout the year. And we were expected to do, I don't remember, one or two, but there were many that sounded very interesting to me. And as a newer teacher, I always looked forward to participating in those experiences because they addressed things that I knew as a teacher I needed some work on. So that was a great experience. And in those days, everything that we did with professional development was all done face-to-face. It was either facilitated at our own school, or our school district had a very large, centralized kind of classroom area for teachers, and that we would meet after school. And occasionally, it would be something that we would get a substitute teacher paid for, and we would go like for the day, and it might be a teaching and learning experience in a classroom type setting, or it might be participating in some kind of a local conference or local teacher experience. But it was really beneficial to me, and I really appreciated it. Now, I know that we live in a different world as far as support for teaching goes, and the idea of receiving an entire catalog of opportunities at the beginning of the school year is probably sounds pretty foreign to many teachers. But the reality is, with technology the way it is now, there are actually many more opportunities available for any teacher to be able to participate in meaningful professional learning experiences. And that's what this final part of the class focuses on. So in the final weeks of this course, you're asked to complete 2 different projects. 2. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about them later in this video, but I will say that everybody in the class will complete the final course review, which is definitely a professional development type of activity and experience. And in that, you will kind of look back over this class and reflect on some of the things that were of value to you and some of the things that you learned that were important. And then there are 3 other projects that you get to choose from. And you need to pick the one that you think is going to be the most meaningful for you. Now, I will say that one of the projects, the Universal Design for Learning project, the UDL project, is something that all students enrolled in the 454 section of this class, they don't get a choice. You all have to do that one. And I'll explain later why that's an important thing for you to do. But everybody else in the class, those of you enrolled in the 445 or 620 sections, you can pick from the other 2 that I'm going to offer. One of them has to do with reviewing this very short text on using ChatGPT assignments in your class, and it's a book of assignments that you would review and look at what might be useful for you. And the other one is about investigating deeper some of the many online professional development opportunities available, and selecting a couple to look at closely and to reflect on and review. So you can do those, or if you're enrolled in those sections, you can also pick the UDL, the Universal Design for Learning project, if you want to. You get that choice when you are going to be working on the project. So I'll say a little bit more about the projects in a moment, but first I kind of wanted to sort of situate this last part of the class, professional development, and reflect on kind of how we got here in this class. So the overall purpose of this class is to encourage you to learn how technology might be used to improve teaching or improve the practice of professional educators. Now, important in that purpose is the word technology. And it's very important for you to understand at this point in the class, if you don't already, that technology has two very distinct definitions. One of them is what people generally think of when they hear the word technology, and that's like computers or any other physical tool, usually something that needs to be plugged in or needs to be charged, that can be useful in a teacher's practice. So that's technology in terms of actual, instruments or things. But the other use of the word technology is very important, and I'm going to read you this definition because it's defined differently depending on what source you get. But this is a very important definition that I really like, and it is the use of scientific knowledge for practical purposes, such as creating tools, processes, and systems to solve problems or make tasks easier. Now, the reason why I bring that up is because that genuinely is the technology that I have been trying to promote in this class. So when you look at the experiences that you've had, I was asking you to, yes, use computers, use artificial intelligence and other creative types of tools, hardware and software tools, but I was asking you to do it to learn more about the other technology, the technology of good and effective instructional design. And instructional design, at least the model that I was promoting and the components of it that I was promoting in this class, are definitely systems, processes, and procedures designed to help you solve problems. And the problems are almost always, or at least should be, related to what is it that you want students to learn how to do, and what can you do most effectively to ensure that they will learn how to do those things. So I asked you to examine, first of all, what's worth learning in the first place. That is a question teachers need to ask themselves pretty much every day on their job. And I asked you to do that in a broad way. But then I looked at some specific components of good design. One had to do with how do you define a context that provides meaning and purpose for students to learn what you want them to learn. So I provided a model and a systematic way to consider how might you design learning contexts and what role might hardware and software tools play in that process. But then we looked at other components of good design, like how to create an effective and compelling introduction, how to present activities that are contextualized and problem-based, but that can communicate information in an effective way. So you completed one project in which you had to apply theory of good message design to how you might communicate information to students. We had looking at the effectiveness of practice and feedback, and how you might use tools like AI to help you with that, and how you might effectively help students review the learning process. So those were, if you want, they were kind of the hidden curriculum of you learning more about the more important technology, the technology of designing effective learning experiences, and regardless kind of what hardware or software you have at your disposal. So that's what this class was about. So if you look at the course big picture, you see that I asked you to define your learners and to communicate who you are so that I could build a community, or at least a social presence. I asked you to look at what strategies you might use to help build community in your own educational setting. We spent a good part of this class looking at how you would use technologies to support specific components of good instruction. And again, that's all part of the big picture. We spent a little bit of time looking at how technology might be useful to help you manage the processes and resources for learning. And then the last part of the class is looking at how technology might be useful for you as you move forward in your practice, whatever it is, and whoever your learners will be. How might you use hardware and software resources that could help you, that could provide opportunities for you to continually improve your practice. So that's what this class was all about. That's what you developing was all about. And I will say right now that some people get a little frustrated with this class because they say, oh, I never learned about this tool. I never learned about that tool. I never learned how to use Google Classroom effectively. And that's because that was not the point of this class. This class had much bigger aspirations than just you learning how to use a specific tool. Now, in the process, I know some of you did learn something like creating Google sites. You learned a lot more about that than you knew before the class started. But that's because that was part of the context of creating an environment for you to be able to communicate your work to me. And if you think about it, nearly every single thing that you are asked to do in this class, every project involves some element of creating something that looked like something that might be useful for you in your practice. And yes, many of the ideas were contrived because, this is a controlled learning environment. But fundamentally, I used creativity as a tool for you to learn some of those important things. And hopefully that was a context that you found provided some meaning and purpose, at least to try to get things done. So that's how we ended up here. So as I mentioned before, you have 2 projects you need to complete for this final section. One of them is that everybody has to do is that you have to go through a course review. And that will involve reading a few short things and reflecting on them and reflecting on important things you learned and some of the experiences that were particularly meaningful for you and some that weren't, so that's important. Now, the other 3 projects that I mentioned earlier are choice projects. Most of you get to pick from any of these 3. But let me just give you a little more detail about them. The first project has to do with you learning more about something called universal design for learning. Now, the reason why I'm assigning this project mandatory to those of you who are enrolled in the 454 section is because UDL is a model of designing learning experiences that specifically addresses the needs of a broad range of students with a broad range of particular needs that if you are a special educator that you will need to address in some way specifically. And they could be learning disabilities of some sort or emotional development issues, something like that. So that it's an important model to learn, and you may have already been presented with it in some capacity earlier. If not, this is a good introduction to what that model is. And the project asks you to apply the principles of that model to the planning of a particular learning experience. And then I'm asking you to look at ways in which you might use technology to help you with specific elements of that plan. And if that sounds like something that could be meaningful to any of you, even if you're not going to be working in the special ed field, then go for it. You're more than welcome to complete that as your project. It's very valuable for any educator, not just those who teach in the special education practices. Now, one of the other choice projects that the other students can choose from one of them is on is what's called AI literacy assignments. And in that project, you'll download this open source book that was developed by some faculty at I believe it's University of Central Florida or South Florida. I don't remember. But it's a book that presents 61 assignments that a teacher might give to students using ChatGPT, or it could be any AI tool like that, using that tool to accomplish a particular task. And one of the underlying goals of all of the assignments is to help students become more literate with AI and its potential. Now, I'm asking you to look at those assignments that are in the book and consider what assignments might be valuable for you in your current or future teaching, and to identify 5 that could be of potential value, but understanding that you would need to edit them in some way, revise them in some way, add things in some way in order to address more content-specific outcomes that you would have, depending on what grade level you teach and what and what subject area. Now, those activities in that book are not going to be appropriate for younger learners. So you're probably not going to find value in that project if your plan is to teach at the primary grade or younger, like preschool. So I wouldn't even consider that one if I was a teacher now, or studying to be a teacher for younger students. The UDL project would be a very good one for any grade level, any age, and any subject area. And finally, there is another project, the Online Professional Development Opportunities Project, that you can pick from, also appropriate for any subject area and any grade level. And this is where you're asked to review a lot of currently available professional development opportunities from a lot of professional organizations. You'll identify the ones that would be applicable to you, and then you'll locate a professional development opportunity that you believe is being offered that you might find some value in. But I am forcing you to look at one professional learning organization and look at their AI. Learning in AI as the focus of that professional development opportunity. So those are going to be your choices, and hopefully the best thing you might want to do is to look at all of them and just look at all the materials and decide which one would be most appropriate for you. So that's it for the rest of the class. This has been quite a journey. I know that some of you might think that I embedded AI in everything, and that there was more to technology and education than AI. But I did that because I think everybody in the professional world of education are grappling with ways that AI might impact their profession in some way. And so it's as important now as 25 years ago learning about this thing called the World Wide Web was important. As important as 10 or 12 years ago, the introduction of smartphones, or at least the ubiquitous presence of smartphones, both in the real world and in some cases for teachers. We had to deal with that, so we have to address AI. And for me personally, I think it is a tool that can really help teachers genuinely improve learning experiences for students if it serves those instructional design components that were the focus of this class. So I hope you get a lot out of these final assignments, and I hope you did get a lot out of this class, and I look forward to reviewing your final work. And you'll have they're being assigned now. You have the break, the holiday break there. You can get it all done then, or take the break and do it later. But hopefully you won't find it too overwhelming, even though these projects are a little bit more daunting than most of the ones up to this point in the class. So anyway, I hope you get a lot out of it, and I hope you enjoy it.